is just as important. Okay? What you'll hear from Doug is that he's very good verbally. He's very good in front of a crowd. And there's plenty is probably more important for an IT person than verbal communication. So writing reports, doing dashboards, doing presentations like this, you need to build those skills. It's a major difference when you go to look for a job, get a promotion, whatever the case might be. And the last thing is the worst part of communication for me is body language. My wife is an executive coach. She tells me all the time how my body language is terrible, and it is. And I'm working on that, but I'm telling you, you need to work on those things. Okay, those 3 areas of communication are real critical for your, whether you become an IT person or do anything else. If you can master those things, you always have opportunities to do some really cool things. The second thing I would tell you this morning is find a mentor. That might be a professor, that might be a boss, that might be somebody, an uncle who works in the industry who you can bounce stuff off of. So I know you've probably heard that, but you're going to have very successful people from all walks of life have multiple mentors. You need to have those mentors. You need to proactively seek those mentors out and help them guide you. What you find when you go to very high levels in any organization, whether it be here at USC or in my company or state government, anywhere, the higher up you go, the nicer those people are. And they really do want to give back. They do want to have coffee with you and spend 30 minutes with you and give you some basic direction. And they will see into your shadow. They will see stuff that you cannot see. And that, I will tell you, is incredibly valuable. Okay? So mentors is a huge thing. The third thing of 4, I'm almost done, is you need to network constantly. Okay? I live in the IT world. I grew up in the software business. I work for a couple of global consulting companies, and I run my own small regional consulting company now. Network constantly. Go to events. Talk to people. Don't be the person behind the laptop, and that's all he or she does. Don't be that person. There's enough of those. We're at quota on those people in IT, okay? And you know those people, right? You might be those people. You know the kid in your dorm or your apartment or whatever, and he or she's always on their laptop, and that's all they ever do, right? If you need some code written or something done, they're the ones you go to. That's awesome, okay? You don't need to be that person. Network all the time. I will tell you, Doug and I came to know each other because a mutual client of ours connected us probably 15 years ago, something like that, okay? And Doug and I network, and Michael and Tom and I network all the time. Who do you know? Can you introduce me to this person? I can absolutely tell you, in my consulting practice, in the 14 years that we've been in business, probably 85% of our revenue, which is multiple millions of dollars, has come through networking. Networking is really, really, really important. The trick with networking, I will tell you, is to provide value to the other person. It's not about what can you give me, it's how can I help you. That's a really critical mindset change. There's some really good books about networking that I can give you. I can share with you if you want to share with them. But networking is a skill that will feed you the rest of your life, okay? And it makes your life a lot richer, a lot sweeter. I can promise you that. So network, network, network all the time, okay? The last thing I'm going to tell you this morning, as you think about what your career is going to be in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, or 50 years when you get old like me, is always be growing and learning. I was not a great student in college. Those of you who know me, that does not shock you. I was a social legend, and I had a great time. And I can tap a keg, and I know how to promote a fraternity party, believe me. But I am a constant learner, reader. I listen to podcasts. I'm on Audible every day. We read books as part of our company culture all the time. You're never going to know it all. One of the things I love about technology is that it's always changing. Therefore, if it's always changing, you need to be changing with it and finding out what's going on, both on the technical side and on the business side. Those are four things, your communication skills, finding a mentor, network constantly, and then always be growing in your field of study. Don't think when you graduate, and you're probably very smart young people, that's why you're in this class, you probably know that you always need to be learning. Homework doesn't stop when you get a degree. Homework does not stop when you get a degree. So keep pushing on those things. 80% of people who are very successful just show up and get there early, stay late, bust their butt while they're there, and they do the extra stuff all the time. I have a bunch of millennials who work for me. I'm not slamming that generation, but they don't have typically the work ethic that my generation has. Doesn't make them wrong, just makes it different. Okay? So if you're in a class of people who get there at 8, leave at 5, then don't expect to get promoted. Don't get upset when you don't get the raise, because you didn't do the work, right? You're not going to get an A on the exam if you didn't burn the midnight oil and get the extra study, right? I was real happy when I was in college with a C+, believe me. Don't be that person, It's easy to differentiate yourself if everybody else is leaving at 5 o'clock, if you stay till 6:15. Makes a big difference. Managers, guys with gray hair, they see that stuff. So I'm going to turn it over to probably one of the best security guys that I know, one of the smartest guys that I know, Doug Hewes, and he's a practitioner. He's living it every day, and so I'm sure he'll have some great insight for you.
That's great.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. How many of you are actually security focused right now? You don't count. I've been here. Really? Anybody want to volunteer as to why they're not looking at security? What are you going into?
Right.
Yeah.
Right now I'm just kind of like feeling out what I want to do, but actually security is an interest that I have. Security.
Does that mirror most of your feelings?
Yeah, I'm interested in security. It's just that this degree program has no specific concentration. It's basically what you would like to do.
My background, I went to University of Miami. My degree is in electrical engineering, computer design option. Had nothing to do with security. Security wasn't a thing back when I started at UM in '85. And I don't think a degree that doesn't have the terms information assurance or information security on it is not going to hold you back by any means. I think most practitioners in this industry do not have degrees in security. And in fact, I know quite a few that are very, very good that don't even have degrees, not to dissuade you from completing this program. So who am I? My name is Doug Hewes. I've been doing computer security professionally for about 25 years. Any of you that have heard of SANS GIAC, the training program, if you ever go through incident handling and hacker exploits track, I helped write the first version of that test when I worked for them. I was named one of the top 50 security practitioners by CSO magazine. And at last count, I had 47 certifications. These are some bigger security ones.
Try the right arrow. Right arrow.
You feel good about that? So why am I here? I was told that you all are looking at either going into security or potentially going into security. So I'm here to give you a few tips of things that I wish someone had told me when I started out in security. I brought my friend Michael along, who is the Chief Information Security Officer for one of the top agencies in the state, who can reiterate most of what I'm saying. As you go through, first thing, and it doesn't matter if you're in technology or security, the first thing you have to keep in mind is that your job exists to support the business or the mission of the organization. And that is the first thing most practitioners lose sight of. They get caught up in this technology is cool, it can make this better, or this security is cool, I have to have this firewall or this intrusion prevention system. But the reality is, that's technology for technology's sake. It doesn't empower the business. If you want to move ahead, if you want to move up, and not be what we call a keyboard monkey sitting at the lowest levels of IT, then you need to work with business line managers, figure out what their pain points are, what their needs are. And if you come up with technology solutions or security solutions, make sure that they're in line, support, and potentially empower those business managers, or you're really never going to make a name for yourself. If you can focus on doing that, that's the quickest way to get ahead and to make your organization successful. So what's information security? At the heart, it's risk management. And everything you learn about your environment, about the technology, about regulations, absolutely critical, because risk management is nothing more than identifying a risk, determining what potential impact that has on your organization. You can only do that if you understand the value of the data, of the information, of the systems that are at risk. What would it cost to be down? What would it cost to lose this data? What would it cost if someone artificially manipulated this data and it was no longer valid? Once you determine the value of that risk, the impact of that risk, you're going to decide whether you mitigate it, spend the money to fix it, whether you transfer it, which is spend the money to outsource it, or whether you just accept it. If you're working on an old mainframe system that you're in the middle of migrating off, and it would cost $1 million to fix an issue to protect $10,000 worth of data, you're obviously not going to fix it. But you need to know enough about the business and about that data and about those systems and about what it costs to mitigate that in order to make that calculation and to logically present that to management. Does that make sense? As Barry said, learning never stops. Anybody that watches the news today and has any interest in technology knows that we go through breach after breach after breach. It's become numbing. Most people basically tune it out today. It's highly unlikely that anyone in this room has not been part of some breach. It might not have been announced because a lot of organizations do not have a legal requirement to announce. You're not subject to HIPAA or IRS regulations, PCI DSS for credit information. You may not release it, but you're going to have to, through your entire IT career, your entire security career, you're going to have to continually learn. Not only networking, learning the business side, communicating, but also keeping up with the new threats, with the new breaches. Some of these new things that come out, look at, how many of you are Apple users, Mac users? Okay, some of you have good taste. High Sierra just came out, and what happened the next day? Does anybody know the vulnerability that Apple rushed to release a patch for? If you encrypt your hard drive, your SSD on High Sierra, as all versions, there's a password hint you can put in to unlock the drive. When you click Show Hint on the first version of High Sierra, it shows your password, not the hint. Probably not the best solution. Things like that happen. You have operating systems with millions of lines of code. They did rush to fix it. And apparently someone in quality control just typed password as a test password and password hint, which is pretty common. So when they saw it come up, they didn't catch it. But if you're at an organization where you have 10,000 Mac users, which is pretty typical in a university or a K-12 school district environment, and you read about this, you're going to have to go take action. You're going to have to know how to fix this very quickly and what the potential impact is. Operating systems change constantly. Internet of Things change constantly. Look at all the new technologies that are in cars today. I have a Jeep Grand Cherokee, and yes, you can pretty much hack into it and roll down my windows and unlock my doors from anywhere in the world. Tesla has the same problem. In fact, Tesla recently, during the hurricane, they came out, and anybody that did not pay for the upgraded battery option, they pushed a software update to unlock that. And it basically let everyone know a couple things. First, there's only one battery. It's whether or not you've paid to access all of it or not, which is a pretty common model in technology as well. The other thing is, it told every hacker in the world that we can completely reprogram a Tesla remotely, all at once. So guess what they're all looking to do now? You got to Las Vegas for Black Hat and DEF CON, the biggest security hacker conferences of the year, where all the hardcore hackers are out there. The Black Hat portion is the proper educational upstanding side. The DEF CON one is more everybody that all is sleeved with tats and they play the game, pick out the Fed. But during the DEF CON portion of it, in the conference area, they have all types of medical devices. This year was a bunch of automotive devices. And basically, it's a lab to go through and hack device after device after device, hacking pacemakers and insulin pumps and things along those lines. So getting back to this, it's all about keeping up with those new technologies. What are they building technology into these days? Refrigerators that can order things, coffee makers that you can remotely across the internet turn on and off. What does that open us up to? Some of the biggest denial of service attacks have been IP cameras, because cameras all have their own password, nobody ever changes them, but they're network devices. So staying up with blogs, with Twitter, with various magazines, keeping up with certifications, things like that are going to be critical. If you go into security, you have to know the underlying technology as well as the people that work with that technology. You have to know it even better. You have to know how it works, and when it's configured incorrectly, how it behaves, and how to go through and break it. So the learning will never end. Just expect that. The other biggest thing is you're always going to be at war. Whether you know it or not, people not only on the outside, and we all hear these nation state attacks like China and Russia, and yes, anybody that's ever looked at the logs of a firewall knows even on your home cable modem, you're going to have 500,000 hits a day from China and Russia just randomly doing drive-by scans. But your bigger threats, your bigger worries, they're not necessarily intentionally aimed at you, are your internal users, are your third-party partners. These people make mistakes, these people have goals that are more aligned with the business mission, but they know nothing about security. You have people that do things like use the same password for every website. How many people in here actually use a different password for every service that they subscribe to? You don't count. Good job. I'd recommend doing that, because if you got on the dark net, you can find tons of passwords. I mean, everybody's account has been compromised. Anybody that, well, at this age group, I'm not sure how many of you had Yahoo accounts, because Yahoo's all but dead. But after the third breach and release of 3 billion email accounts, everybody that used the same password there, well, not everybody, a lot of people use the same passwords on email, they do at work. If you keep up with the security news every year, there's a company that tracks all of the passwords that were released as part of a breach. And in years past, 10, 15 years ago, biggest passwords were Bible terms and golf terms. Now, we all have complex passwords. We have to have uppercase and lowercase and numbers and punctuation. So that's going to fix the problem, right? No. Biggest password that they find now is the season, because we have to change our password every, 3 months. So spring with a capital S, 2017, exclamation point, was the biggest password released during spring of this year. And people just go through and they change the season. And it meets all the rules. So you get users in your environment or partners that aren't secure or aren't thinking about security, they're as much of a threat to you as anyone in Russia or China, and a lot more so. Just keep that in mind. You will always be under attack. Security person, am I wrong, Mike? Security person is never the popular guy in the network. You know, if you do a good job, signs of success are nobody's harassing you, but you're never going to get praised. Which brings us to never underestimate politics. Barry was saying that communication skills are critical. I'd add one thing to that. The ability to translate from tech to English is incredibly important. I can stand up here and I can talk about 45 CFR 95, 163 subpart F and all of its requirements all day long. none of you are going to have any idea what I'm talking about. Neither is management, neither are any of my customers. You have to go in and present the actual threats in English with real world examples. You have to convince executive leadership that you're here to support the needs of the business, the needs of the organization. And you have to work with information technology teams where the people in this room that are going into security and the people that are going into IT, I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to be enemies. Because IT is always about making the data flow. Security is all about stopping the data from flowing. So there's always this combative environment. You need to, in any organization that you become employed with, from the very beginning, befriend technology, befriend management, make an effort to go out and learn management's goals, and work with the technology teams so that they understand what you're doing and they understand the reasons why you're doing it. As I mentioned before, the learning never ends, but learning technology is critical. And I know in this program you all are learning technology, obviously, but keeping up with the newest Microsoft operating systems, the newest Linux kernels, the newest MacBooks, the newest versions of Android and iOS. In order to effectively work in security, you have to know the details of this technology. You have no idea in my years how many times I've come across auditors. I'm talking high-level auditors from the United States Office of Inspector General, from the IRS. They come in and they sit down and they start going through the checklist, asking you questions. You know, do you make sure all your passwords meet the complexity requirements? The problem is they have no idea how to do this. They've never seen a Microsoft MMC. They've never seen the interface of RACF. They have no idea how to change a PAM password in Linux. You can say anything you want to them. They're going to write it down and go, yep, check. It's the same thing across the board. If you don't understand the underlying technologies within your organization, you cannot write policies and procedures that are going to make sense. That's just going to go back to the political side where IT is going to look at you and go, what are you talking about? We can't do that. Microsoft doesn't even have that ability. Things along those lines. So stay up with the tech, even if you're going into the compliance side or the coding side of security, where you don't normally have to know the underlying network technologies and subnetting and routing and switching, but it is absolutely critical, and it will make your life a whole lot easier. If you are going into security, particularly into governance and compliance, you should be aware of something that I really wish someone would have told me when I started down that path. Basically, everything goes back to NIST 853. There are what are known as standards, and the National Institute of Standards and Technology released quite a few of them, but 800-53 is the overarching document that defines all of the potential controls that every government entity could potentially use. You don't adhere to 853, it's just a set of standards. What you do adhere to might be FERPA or in education, or Sarbanes-Oxley if you're a publicly traded company, or Gramm-Leach-Bliley if you're in the financial sector, PCI DSS for credit cards, HIPAA, MARS-E for Medicaid, IRS 1075 if you work with Social Security, VA, unemployment, Medicaid, anything that requires IRS data. All of those governance packages, all they do are pull controls directly from 853. So if you learn 853 controls, 300 or so controls that are in there, then any environment you go into, no matter what they're subject to, you'll be familiar with the controls because they're all derived from these standards in the United States. And yeah, I did stipulate the International Standards Organizations, 27001 through 005, are the European equivalents to our NIST 853. Does that make sense? So I start throwing out acronyms. Everybody looks sleepy. Internal risks, and I talked about this a little earlier, but does everybody know what crypto lockers are? Anybody ever been hit by a crypto locker? Sorry, anybody have a friend that was ever hit by a crypto locker? Phishing, which I spelled wrong. I think we all know what phishing is. It's the new version of phishing through SMS, through text messages. So malware, when we talk about malware, viruses, worms, things along those lines, just a curiosity, if you have antivirus software, good trusted antivirus software on your machine, that's running, that's fully up to date, newest signatures, running in real-time protection mode, how many viruses do you think it catches? Does anyone here think it catches 100% of them?
No.
80%? The average is 45%. Most of the lab tests show that the best antivirus software stops about 45% of malware. So the number one attack vector these days is through phishing. People click on anything. It's not very difficult. All I have to do is find out one or two facts about you. I mean, I can go to Tom's Facebook page, find out what he does, in his free time. Maybe he's a fisherman or hunter. Send him a couple links that'll entice him into discounts at Sportsman's. He's going to click on it. Then I can install software and I own his machine. Your users will do the same thing, and your antivirus software is only going to catch it 45% of the time. It's constantly about trying to educate them, which is an ongoing challenge. Awareness training is required under almost every governance package. And even if you're not subject to governance, most organizations do have security awareness training programs. I was with one organization that had about 5,500 users. We did a phishing test. It's very similar to the same results that we had in the checkpoint presentation. We tested all of them, sent phishing emails. Almost 90% of the people, and sadly 100% of the executive leadership, all clicked on the phishing emails. We then went through about 2 months of both awareness training, which was online video training where they learned about hovering their mouse over to make sure that the actual URL is the same as the text, all that happy stuff. We used a company called fishme.net out of Greenville, which provides professional service of generating phishing emails and providing you the metrics from it. After 2 months and a lot of money spent to train everybody, any guesses on where we were as far as our after training exam?
89%.
Close. We're about 65% still clicked on it. So it only takes one person to click on it to give someone a backdoor. You come in, you install Netcat on a server once you have access to it, and then you go out any open port, and now you have basically the early version of Go to My PC, developed by hackers, straight into the machine, into the internal environment. So users don't always mean to be a risk, but they're your biggest risk. Partner problems. This is a big one for me. I've spent a lot of time teaching companies about third-party partners and the challenges. You've all heard of HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, 1996, and its 2010 high-tech extensions and the omnibus rules, etc. Under high-tech, under the 2010 extensions, every organization, every what's called a covered entity, so a hospital, a health insurance company, etc., anybody that they bring in that potentially has access to their data is a business associate. Well, the business associates, and this includes the janitors that might have access to the records room, the people that shred the paper, the company that comes in to reconfigure the switches and routers, any that could potentially see this data is a business associate. When I was the chief security officer at Medicaid, we had about 325 business associates. And I'll admit, true to what most organizations face, we didn't have the money and we didn't have the staff to go out and actually conduct audits of these business associates. Under HIPAA, you either have to conduct an audit or they have to provide self-attestation at the onset of the contract and then every 3 years. Well, we ignored them because we were doing everything we could to secure our own environment, and we took them at their word. Fortunately, in the 4 years I was there, we did not experience any problems because of a third party. Anything major, we had a couple recordings, transcripts lost, and they were found. But little organizations like Anthem, the parent company of Blue Cross Blue Shield, has been breached twice, both times through third parties. South Carolina's Department of Revenue, It's a third-party contractor, had admin credentials, his laptop was hacked. South Carolina Insurance Fund, same thing. Target, you had a HVAC contractor who was hacked. They got it through there and then went into the point of sale system. Most breaches, 63% of breaches just in 2016 were all caused by these partners. So to be a successful security person, do not ever forget to not only hold them accountable legally through contractual language, stating that you must adhere to these standards, but actually follow up on it. Actually go out and audit them, even if it's only 20 or 30% a spot check. Golden rule of security. How many people have heard the principle of least privilege?
I comment on that. That's an excellent point. Les Eisner, but I've got a government background. If you look at the Chinese J-31 fighter, it looks like a Joint Strike Fighter.
Mm-hmm.
And as much money as we, the taxpayers, pour into our industry partners and making them compliant, we fail, miserably fail.
Yes.
The government doesn't admit that public, but we. And so the challenge I say on the industry side is on small and medium-sized companies is, potentially cash drain every quarter or whatever, and whether they're in a mentor protege thing. How do we really crack that code? Because I agree with you. It's easy to say you have to be in compliance, but in practicality, and you just footage, we don't do a very good job. And I would argue it's going to get even more complex when phishing and some of the other stuff is generated by AI and that sort of thing. So we're kind of a soup sandwich now. How do we?
It's a challenge. Security practitioners are easily outnumbered 1,000,000 to begin with. And you get into the SMB space, you get into environments that can't afford a dedicated security person. Most of these small companies can only afford 1, 2, maybe 3 people on the IT side altogether. The best that you can hope to do is follow best practices. If you're not subject to governance, take something like the NIST 853 I mentioned earlier, and try to implement the same level of controls at the lowest level, the easiest level to comply with. It's going to take you 2 to 3 years to get to that point. And it doesn't necessarily have to be expensive. There are policies, procedures, and technologies that are open source, that are free, that will get you a lot of the way there. But at the end of the day, the reality is, and you can ask the NSA for the third time, no matter how much money you have, no matter how good your people are, nobody's impenetrable. Everybody can be hacked.
My information's been given away so many times by the federal government. Mine's holding up a coffee pot in Beijing somewhere.
Exactly. I think I have about 25 years of theft protection at this point. So between VA and OPM and DOR and everybody else. Getting back to AC6, and AC6 is a designation in the state 153. It's an access control, family control. It's the principle of least privilege. It basically means exactly the opposite of what IT does, which is you deny access to everything and you allow by exception. Now, while this is the golden rule of security, it does get back to the very first slide I put up. It's all about the business. So some people, Michael, may shut everything down at the cost of business or with some sort of negative impact on business. So when I say make sure, grant by exception only those who need it, that before you shut things down, you do speak with management. You do have an understanding of the business model and the mission, so you know what you can shut down. For example, in government agencies, a lot of state government agencies shut down access to Facebook and to social media in general. Quite a few agencies, HR departments pipe up and go, that's how we recruit. Or that's how we follow up on living conditions for the children that are entrusted to our care because they post pictures, various things like that. But if the IT department did not speak with the business line managers, you're not going to know that. You're going to negatively impact the business. So wherever you can, shut down access to things and grant by exception. And The last part I have on here is critical. When you look, you might go through and audit network rights on various systems, and it may be absolutely perfect. But what happens the first time somebody changes departments or somebody leaves the organization? The challenge is not getting them correct in the beginning. The challenge is keeping those access levels accurate. Because as people move around, people just continually add more rights and they never take away the old ones. What's wrong with that? What if that's the person that clicks on the phishing email? That person now has rights to a whole bunch of stuff that they shouldn't. How many people have heard of defense in depth? Okay, defense in depth is, let's take a look at the medieval times model. You had a castle. First fortifications, it might be hills. They might have, sorry, when I was in junior high school, I played Dungeons and Dragons.
He always, that's like the first thing we learned in this.
Oh, good job, Tom. So, you'll have rock barriers that are easy to walk around, but they slow down horse-drawn carriages. You'll have moats and drawbridges and walls and hot grease and archers with flaming arrows, and I may be getting a little Hollywood, but it's the same type of thing. You can't count on any single line of defense. Reason is, take a look at Cisco ASA firewalls, one of the biggest selling firewalls in the world. Several different times, ASAs have been shown to have a critical vulnerability where someone could go in and with very little effort completely crash them or circumvent them. It's a great product called cut-through proxy. So that's why at the federal level, you're required to have two different firewalls. You have your internet firewall and your DMZ firewall, and they must be different brands. So if one does have a vulnerability, it's not impacted by the other. Your entire network should be architected that way. A typical application model, you'll have a web server or user interface server, the application layer server, and you'll have the database server. Or typically multiples of each of those that are load balanced and replicated. Those should all exist on separate VLANs, separate network segments. And there should be what's known as a layer 3 control between them, a firewall, a switch with extended access control rules. I'm assuming in a technology group, most of you are following along with this. But only the specific TCP and UDP ports that are necessary should be open between those particular boxes. Then your production environment, your test environment, your QA environment, your development environment should all be completely separate and scaled the exact same way. That's a defense in depth model. Don't forget to put firewalls and other security controls between your servers and your users. Because again, phishing attacks, users do things that they don't realize the repercussions of. They'll go into a group share, have been given too many rights, delete files thinking that they're on their local computer, and they ended up just deleting the only copies of some important database or some important spreadsheet. So look at policies, look at procedures, look at rights, look at controls, look at network architecture. Defense in depth is absolutely critical. And I think my last slide. How many people in here are looking at going into software development and coding? A lot of late nights, a lot of Mountain Dew. Developers tend to get in their own world, and they usually have very tight deadlines because they screw around and sit on beanbags and write on boards for the first 2 months, and then all of a sudden their gate review is in 3 days. So now it's panic mode. Maybe that's just state government. But what happens is developers need sets of rights. They need local administrator rights. They need to be able to do things that regular users can't. They typically work in their own little bubble. So they don't typically interact with IT or security. As a security person, you need to change that. You need to take the initiative to go work with the development managers and make sure they understand the requirements. For example, Medicaid is subject to something called the minimal acceptable risk safeguards for exchanges, so MARS-E. Under MARS-E regulations, you have to do things like, there's 18 different types of file attributes that must be logged as far as whether it's read, read-only, read-write, etc. access control, every failed and every successful login must be logged and retained for a year, 3 years if it's used in an audit. If your developers are writing an application and they don't include those steps in the beginning, it takes literally 100 times longer after the fact. So every gate review, and do you cover project management?
This is a separate class from project.
Okay. So depending on your project management methodology, you'll typically have gate reviews at each stage. Maybe not an agile approach, but a typical PMI type approach, a waterfall approach. Every gate review, or in an agile situation, every periodic review, you should have a checklist of these are the things this portion of the software should do. It should exchange certificates, for example, to make sure it's secure communications and to ensure non-repudiation. It has to log this access. It has to have granular rights. For example, in a database, you're going to have everybody's full information, social security numbers, et cetera, in a database. But maybe this worker only needs the last 4 of the social security number. You need to make sure you build in that logic. The earlier as a security person you can start working with your development team, the more secure that application is going to be. And in the end, it's actually going to take significantly less time to get into production. So my last thing on here is never too early to start your system security plan. When you work under a governance model, every environment you have an SSP, a system security plan, that's typically 500 to 1,000 pages of documentation on every security control, how you implement it in that particular application or environment. Start writing that as soon as the application starts in development. I can't say that enough because that's a 3 to 5 year thing to complete. And I'm looking at Tom because when Tom was deputy CISO, he went through the same pain in quite a few agencies as well. So, if you're all still awake, that's all I've got. Any questions? Start.
So, what was your initial end to information security? Like, what got you into it? Like, going off of what Yvonne said and everything about not having this. This isn't really in our major per se. Like, we don't really technically study it.
Mm-hmm.
But
Well, just to piggyback off of that, I'm saying that our major has no specific concentration.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
part of the
so-
curriculum, but
what was your end to that, and would you recommend like any certifications to go through to do that? Because working with ISOC or information security is something I want to do through my work currently, but it seems like those guys did it through, most of them, I think 60% of them did it through military experience.
Right.
So what would be your recommendation on just getting into that
So
area?
tell them where you work.
Scan.
Okay. So they don't have any security concerns. Wait, they just built a SOC.
Yeah, they have ISOC now,
Built a
so
SOC.
the team I work with does stuff with them, and that's where I kind of want to segue into. I do virtualization development.
Okay.
So VMware stuff, but
Okay.
but I want to go from that to be able to do cybersecurity and stuff. So
There's a couple different things. So how do you transition from IT operations to security?
Yeah.
In order to do that, you need a broad understanding of security. So I typically tell people, while in and of itself, Security Plus certification is not going to advance your career tremendously, a lot of people think of security as its encryption, or its passwords, or its access rights, or it's this firewall. People don't understand that of the 18 separate control families in NIST, for example, you have a project management family of controls. Meaning, do you have enough people? Do you have enough money assigned? Do you have executive leadership buy-in? Do you have a system security plan? Things like that. You have audit sections, etc. The advantage of Security Plus is that it's kind of a lightweight version of CISSP. So Security Plus will give you kind of a taste of the broad range of all the things that comprise security. Just like IT, there's a lot of different areas you can go into in security, whether it's audit, whether it's operational, etc. So that'll also help you focus the specific area you want to look at. So it's governance or compliance. It's I want to be a firewall junkie. Or I want to code securely, or I want to do what I do now, which is pen testing, which we call hackers
that's
with
kind of what
mortgages.
I want to focus on more
Exactly.
so testing stuff.
Yeah. So if you're looking at pen testing, Security Plus will give you the broad range. In pen testing, when I talk about staying up with technology, absolutely critical. You need to know the newest version of everything, the newest version of VMware, of Windows, Linux, better than the people that are adminning it. Because you have to know what to look for as far as common mistakes in configuration. So technology you can learn on your own. If you're new pen testing, you're going to have a home lab. There's no way around that. Then start looking at, you don't necessarily have to go through like SANS training. SANS training classes, if you get the opportunity, they're great training classes, but they're expensive. They're $6,000 to $7,000 per class now. You can go to something like Pen Test Academy, which is an online service for $39 a month, and there are literally hundreds of video courses that you can take, each one a separate module on different aspects of pen testing. From there, you look at Certified Ethical Hacker and then Advanced Certified Ethical Hacker. Those are relatively straightforward classes. They're not going to make you a pen tester, but they're going to give you the roadmap of what you do to get to that level. At that point, it's just a matter of finding a junior position as a pen tester, and with those certifications, someone's going to hire you, because for every security person out there, there's probably 10 jobs right now, at least. So, just why I recommend security over IT. IT is a very commoditized area. Everyone is a Microsoft certified network administrator, and it doesn't pay very well anymore. If you go into security, it pays a lot higher because there's a lot higher demand, particularly if you go into privacy these days. You go into IAPP certifications, where typically only attorneys have earned those certifications in the past. More and more privacy regulations are coming out, both particularly in the EU leading the way, but NIST. When I said earlier NIST 853, I specified revision 4 because that's the newest revision that includes an entire section of privacy. So if you did go into privacy, you would be looking at things like the IAPP certifications. Beyond that, the best thing that you can do to become a good pen tester is network. Pen testing is the kind of thing where you learn a couple tricks, this guy learns a couple tricks, and you go to B-Sides, for example. B-Sides Greenville's coming up. B-Sides, for those of you that don't know, is a series of conferences around the country that are quasi-user group-ish. They're not large conferences. They're typically free or very inexpensive to go to. If you're with somebody like Scanna and you get the opportunity to go to RSA out in California, or better yet, Black Hat DEF CON, it's a very enlightening experience. When you sit there and you watch someone in real time, live, in 15 minutes, hack into AWS, first you realize you just committed several felonies. But then you're like, wow, that's cool. And then you're like, oh crap, AWS just got approved at a high impact level under FedRAMP to store military secrets. And that's what he did in 15 minutes. Someone didn't think this through. But those are the types of things that you're going to have to do. And pen testing, more so than any other area of security, is going to require continual learning. And if you enjoy that, I mean, I love learning new things, so that's an area I particularly like. You're the kind of person that at 6 p.m., gonna sit down, watch TV, go out and play with the dog, whatever. Yeah, pen testing's not your area. So, yeah. Huh?
All right, Doug, I'd like to thank you for your time today. We're going to go ahead and wrap up today's webinar. We will be back next Friday with Randy Rambo. And once again, thanks to Barry and Doug.